So, namaste and welcome to Satsang today. So, Satsang is an ancient, as old as time, as old as there's been people, human beings, there's been Satsang in some form or another. And it literally means to sit down, to gather together, to come together in recognition of the truth of who we really are. Because we are not this body, we are not the mind. We are inclusive of those. Those are happening inside us. But we are so much more than we have taken ourselves to be. And Satsang is really where we come, not just to believe that there's something other than the body and mind, but to actually experience it and to come to live as that. And to live as that effortlessly and continuously. That's the end of that part of the journey. And it begins then a discovery and exploration of what it is like to consciously go about your life as a human being, experiencing all of that entails, and remembering effortlessly who you are. That doesn't mean a mental understanding, not thinking up here, I am everywhere, although that can happen, but just to know that when we meet another being or another thing or another species or anything, animals, plants, rocks, that we're experiencing our very own self and the equanimity that comes from that there's nothing that we could experience that isn't our own self. We discover that the universe is actually friendly and helpful, and that we've really only been experiencing our thoughts about it. So Satsang is perhaps the most important thing we could do or not do. Satsang is perhaps the most important thing we could attend, put our attention upon. And we don't need to work hard at this. We just need to relax and absorb and open ourselves up to what might be here to experience. So I'm going to dive into the questions. There's a lot of questions coming in at the moment, so I'll go through a couple of these, and then if anybody wants to ask anything here today live or share something, there'll be time for that. So this first one says, why is it taking the delay in knowing the truth in spite of the fact that it's more than 35 years of spiritual struggle? So direct and to the point. And I remember that feeling. I mean, it was 25 years for me, not 35, but it was the same desperation that I can feel in this, these words that you've written here. So why does it take so long to wake up to the truth? What is it that actually is going on there? What's the delay? And the clue for me here is in what you have written, the spiritual struggle. So awakening for me was 25 years of struggle, well, 24, something like that. And then 2 or 3 years of actually seeing and deepening. 24 years to realize that what I was actually doing wasn't working. And in a way it was, because it got me to this desperation point. So in a way it served, everything serves purpose. Nothing is wasted. And you wouldn't have sent this in without these 35 years, maybe, who knows, but struggling, searching, seeking, trying harder is only going to make you feel further away from the effortless self that you already are. And that begs the question then, well, how do I find it? How do I find my authentic nature? If it's not about struggling and striving and efforting, and those are actually things that work in our daily existence as a human being, but they actually work against us in terms of awakening. So instead of trying to get something, trying to make something happen, we're going to take that energy and we're going to turn it into a curiosity about what's actually here already. Recognizing if we haven't found it yet, that the way that we're searching for it probably isn't an effective way. And first thing I want you to do is to recognize I might have been looking in the wrong way. Or you might have recognized that a long time ago, but be beating yourself up over it completely. So one of the things I had to overcome in my own awakening was this, I would hear teachers say the self is everywhere and it's not absent from anywhere. It's right where we're seeking. It is showing up as the seeker. And all that is true, of course, but it actually just made me feel even more frustrated that I couldn't actually recognize it. If it's the only thing that there is, how is it that I'm not recognizing it? That made me extremely angry, and that anger turned inside into self-blame and eventually self-hatred, which I had a good deal of anyway. This just kind of was the icing on that cake. So we can let go of that and forgive ourselves, and we realize you never are taught as a human being how to recognize that which isn't a phenomenon. All of our schooling, all of it, everything we learn in our human existence is about phenomena, the coming and going of objects. And there is no class in junior school, elementary school, that says, here's how to recognize that in which all phenomena appear. So if you add to that the fact that we're trying to find that which is not a phenomenon, using the tools that we have that actually work with phenomena and objects, no wonder we can't actually find it. No wonder we get frustrated and despondent. So my question then became, how do I look that's going to be effective? If it's not a something, how do I actually search for something that's not a thing? Search for the noumenon, the self, capital S, the consciousness, the silence. And it began to dawn on me that it must be here right now, but I'm overlooking it somehow. I must be perceiving it right now, but I'm not valuing it. It must be something that I've perceived forever, and yet not actually recognize, that is the self. And that was an extraordinary thing for me to realize, because I'd had this idea that I would know when I recognize the self. And you see all these people having these amazing experiences of self-recognition. And it seemed ludicrous to me that I could have been noticing the self my entire existence and not noticed. And yet it occurred to me after a certain amount of, a lot of desperation, despair, and a deep, deep depression, that it must be here and being overlooked right now. That was the only option that was left when I thought through this analytically from a logical place. If it's the only thing that exists, the infinite self, it must be here right now, and we're not noticing. Or we're not noticing that we're noticing. So how much do you value the silence in between these words compared to the words? How much do you value the space in the room in between the objects in the room? Or do you walk into the room and look at the objects and ignore the space, the emptiness? How much do you value the movement of thought and ignore the still, silent consciousness that's noticing those thoughts? And we all do this because we're trained and taught to value phenomena over everything else. And there's nothing wrong there. Of course, we need that faculty to navigate our physical world. But we must begin to turn that on its head. And that's not an efforting. It's a choice. I'm going to cultivate a new habit to notice the background of my experience, at least as much as I notice the foreground. So the foreground is what's moving and changing, these words, my body, everything in this room. And yet there is some still silent space in which all of this is appearing. My body, this laptop, Claire sat over there, another laptop, everything in this room, sofas, everything. And for a long time, I was trying to find a self in the phenomena and overriding and ignoring the noumenon, the infinite self, the consciousness, as unimportant, dead, empty, inert space that just was necessary for the objects to appear in. That was its only function. It had to be here before the object showed up in it. Other than that, it was valueless, not exciting, not worth any further investigation. So instead of effort and struggle and trying to get, it's a relaxation into a, have I really seen this clearly, actually? Have I seen the fullness of what is already here? And if I see it, or I hear the silence and it feels ordinary, dull, boring, it's like that for everyone at first. Stillness, meh, stillness, not exciting. Consciousness, well, I've had consciousness forever. I'm conscious of thoughts. How much of our attention goes to examining the consciousness rather than what the consciousness is aware of? So it becomes a choice to value that more. Not that phenomena or objects are valueless, they're fine. It's just to notice our bias towards them as human beings and to totally ignore the only thing that's always here. Even if I took everything out of this room, my body, everything out of this room, knocked the house down, cleared away the rubble, there would still be the space standing there. If I set off a bomb in the space, it couldn't destroy it. Always here. It will be here forever. Is it dead, inert, empty space then? Or is it sentience itself? So letting go of trying to do it the way that you've been doing it. Less of this and more of this. What is it that's already here? And taking that momentum of that energy and allowing it to blossom into, I must be looking right past the self, experiencing it continuously, and yet not really seeing it. And that's the arrogance our mind has, that it says it would know because it will come with bliss and joy and peace and love. Well, it doesn't at first. At first, it's just silence and it's boring. And I'd rather fill it with sounds, the TV, the radio, my thoughts, you know? But that's because we think we know what silence is. If you really were open to experience silence, you come to see it's the source of everything. Consciousness is not just my consciousness. It is the cosmic being showing up as a human being, appearing to be my consciousness. So I would suggest that you listen to what's been said and really see if you can shift your focus to what's already being perceived by you. There's so many names for it: emptiness, noumenon, self, capital S, awareness, presence, here-ness, now-ness, beingness, I amness, probably going around some I've already said, stillness. There's endless names, also known as God, Supreme Self, Parabrahman, Brahman, infinite names for reality. And you find one that works for you and ignore the rest temporarily at least. Find one name that opens a doorway for you. And then follow that. It's a relaxing, it's a softening, it's an opening, it's a tuning in. If you had to, if you remember the old style radios where you, instead of pressing a button, you had to tune the actual dial. Now you press a button and it searches for a frequency and picks it up itself and tunes it in. Before, you had to actually incrementally tune in to receive what's already here being broadcast. And you had to do it really slowly. Knowing that it was already here, the station was broadcasting. And you had to find the right way to actually tune in and listen. That's all we're doing. It's already here. It must be. but looking for it in the ways that we have tried to before. If that's not working, then our intelligence has to say, well, maybe there's another way to look, without blaming yourself. That's the key. So, hello, Helen. I'm so grateful to have found you to help me on my path to awakening. I wanted to know if there's a technique to help overcome triggers from childhood. I had an experience recently where I felt hurt and angry at a friend. Even though I know the truth, I couldn't turn off the hurt and anger, which I know is from a childhood wound. I tried to focus on the feeling in my body, but still felt the inner pain. And although I can intermittently come into the present as my true self, the issue hasn't resolved. Thank you for your support. So this came up because you can come into the present moment. This is coming up for a resolution now that you're seeing who you really are, because from there, that's the only place we can heal these things. We might have first experienced them as childhood traumas, but really they're still playing in our adult life. What is a trauma? You could describe it in many ways, but you could say that it's some point in our history as a separate being where we didn't get what we needed. So quite often security from another being. We're looking to other beings to give us a sense of security, a sense of love, being loved, being lovable, being approved of, being liked, wanted, needed, all of those things and more, respected, valued. So because you're now seeing that you are the source of all of these things, you don't need to try to get them anymore from your outside environment, as you're allowing it to come from the inside out, overflowing into your body and then into your life. More than enough of these resources. You can't actually feel unsafe when you recognize you can never die. You never cease to exist, that you're existing everywhere as everything. And then we become super aware of those places in our life where we're still looking for something from someone. And you're not going up to this friend going, if you make me feel safe, I'll make you feel liked. Let's shake hands on it. But that's what we're all doing, isn't it, as human beings? I'll respect you if you respect me. I'll value you if you do this thing for me. And it's this to and fro, push and pull, ego thing going on. So this is why this is coming up now to be resolved. So what is it you feel that you needed from that friend that you didn't seem to get? Was it security, approval, recognition, love, respect? What is it that you didn't get in that childhood experience? And without blame of those other beings either, they couldn't give you what they didn't have either. Nobody can make you feel safe if they feel desperately unsafe at the core of their existence as well. And everyone does. Everyone believes they're a separate being and that their existence is finite and limited and will come to an end. Whether they're conscious of that fear or not is the only difference. So without blaming them, and also without blaming you, what is it that you're looking for from this friend subtly? And can you begin to allow that? We won't know that it's here to allow it from the inside out unless we can consciously say, I'm trying to get it from the outside in, because that's just an old mechanism that I'll be asked to swap over in my relationships now. This person makes me feel loved and safe, and when they commit to be with me for the rest of my life. This one makes me feel worthy when they need me and I can do something to help them. It's on and on and on it goes. This intertangled web of needs, wants that we're trying to get from each other. Instead, the awakened way is there's more than enough of that in my recognition of who I really am, whatever that is that I'm trying to get. And I'm going to allow it to flow. I'm not just going to assume that it's not here just because I'm not experiencing it right now. Maybe I'm not experiencing safety and security and approval because I've been starting from the assumption that they're not here and I need to get them from the outside in. It took me a while to figure this out. After seeing it deepen for me, I had to swap my relationships over. And it was quite shocking to find out that I was looking for something, at least one thing from everyone, sometimes 4 or 5 things. putting this impossible demand on someone that they couldn't fulfill either because they didn't have it. Then getting angry at them when they didn't give it, even though they didn't know what I wanted from them. Somehow I expected them to know. But the beautiful thing then was allowing that to come from the inside out, being a source of infinite supply, oozing out into the world. More than enough of this thing, so that you can be that warm fire for everyone to come around and warm their hands on, and they're not having to ask anything from you. They can rest too. When it's coming in abundance, the more that they ask, the more that you have, so you don't experience any lack or exhaustion or anything. It's a supply and demand thing. Bathing your own body and mind in that first, and then allowing it to flow. So have a look at what you think you need and or want, and see if it isn't already here. Really question if it isn't already here. Seems like it isn't, but maybe the fact that we've been trying to get it from other beings is obscuring the fact. As we're starting, we wouldn't be trying to get it from someone else if we were sure it was already here. The very idea that the infinite self holds as a human being, that I need to find love, obscures its presence right now, right here. So, hi Helen, thank you for taking questions as always. It is so much appreciated. I love your selfless giving of time and insight. Thank you. My question for you is around letting go and trusting life, source, or love. I deeply know this is what's holding me back from experientially knowing oneness. I am so deep in the head. I don't know if you call it masculine energy or right-brained thinking, but I don't have the belief to trust God, to trust life. What can block trust? I've sat with this question and no answer comes forth to be seen and acknowledged. What does come forth is muddled emotions of apparent sadness, despair, and longing for connection through trust. What am I missing, and how to find the key? Well, this is very similar to the previous question, actually. Nobody's mind or ego or sense of self, separate sense of self, is able to trust God, life. It just, even when I'd deeply seen who I really was, there was still this part of me that did not trust life to provide for me. And I had to actually go through an experience of seemingly running out of resources. And there was nothing I could do about that. I was backed into a corner financially, and couldn't work because I'd hurt my shoulder. And I was doing a very physical job at the time, and still couldn't trust life. And then on the second to last day, before I'd literally run out of money and there was nothing to pay the bills the next month, some person, and I still to this day don't know how they got my bank account details, must be through a mutual friend, but I actually went on my bank and there was £1,000 there. And this happened, not at this scale, but things like this happened again and again and again. Of course, I wrote and told them, thank you through the tears. Even after this was happening regularly, not necessarily gifts from other people, but life showing me, you'll be okay, you'll be okay, you'll be okay, you'll be okay. You are okay. You haven't run out yet. You still haven't run out yet. You still haven't run out yet. You still haven't run out yet. Have you noticed? You still haven't actually run out yet. There is still this yes, but going on inside. Still couldn't trust. And that lack of trust still was there, even when there was more than enough coming in regularly and had been for quite some time. It just eventually fell away as not relevant. I didn't manage to ever make my mind trust the self, or that it's a friendly universe, a benign, friendly, helpful reflection of me, and that it's going to reflect back to me what I think about myself and the universe and the world and everyone else. So you don't have the belief to trust God. Well, that just makes you a human being, normal. Instead of trying to unblock that trust, why don't we see if there's a part of you that's already knowing that everything's okay? Let's not try to change our mind about something. Years after, there was even always enough money in my bank account. Not masses, but always enough. Even years after that, still walking up to an ATM, there'd be this dry mouth and my hand would be shaking in case there wasn't enough in there because of this very conditioned trigger response that had happened so many times. Even though I knew there was enough money and I was only going to get some cash. I checked it 10 minutes before or something. I knew there was going to be enough. Still, this response was happening to some part of my body and mind. It was quite enlightening in itself that went on for as long as it went on for. So if you want to speed this up, I'd suggest starting a miracle journal. And that is to document the miracles that happen every day. So those are not going to be, Krishna appeared in front of me type of miracle, although that might happen. But I went to the store with my last £10 note and I managed to get everything I needed with that £10 note because everything I needed was on offer. That's a miracle right there. That's you reorganizing the universe. How many times do we have that happen and we just walk away and not notice? And when we really don't feel we can trust life, we don't remember those little moments. And there are at least 10 of them, at least a day, if you really dig deep and look. So I began to write these things down. Something I needed came from another being without me having to buy it. I mean, I'm talking financially here, but always something I needed with the teaching, some skill that I didn't have. Somebody just showed up and said, can I help? And I kept a miracle journal for over a year. And page after page after page of these, I found 20 pence on the road this morning. Mine says, that's not a miracle. Well, depends how you look at it, right? So I had to really train myself to notice what was already happening, because if this idea that I can't trust, that I'm not going to remember these things, even if I see them in that moment, I'm not going to remember them when I need to. If you've got pages and pages and pages and pages of tiny little miracles again and again and again and again and again and again, it's going to become this overwhelming evidence. And some of those miracles are bigger. And some of them are just, I have no idea how that happened. There is no way that could have occurred. And then suddenly it did. And these miracles get bigger and bigger and bigger then, as you realize that this is how life actually is. That before you know you need something, it's being provided. But can we let that happen? Let that in? So how do I trust life? I would sidestep that question and let that part of you distrust and really look at noticing what's already happening, because it will be. We're just so focused on what we don't believe is happening, we won't see. This is from my own experience already, completely. Everything I'm saying is from my own experience, but the other part of your question, I'm longing for connection through trust. So you put conditions on the connection there. Just long for connection, end of story. And first of all, question if it's not already here. Don't wait for something to happen or change before you feel that you can connect with the infinite source of everything, because it is already your own self. And if you are putting conditions on that something within you has to change, you have to learn to trust before you can connect. The self, it doesn't care whether your mind trusts or not. It doesn't even care whether your mind notices it or not. It is here already. So what is it you feel you want from that connection, and why are we so sure it's not already here? Well, love. I want to feel love. I want to feel safe. I want to feel good enough, more than good enough. I want to feel so good that I've never even questioned my worth ever again. I want to recognize my innate divinity. You have to really, really get quiet and let go of assumptions that something has to happen before that can unfold. What is it that you want? Connection. It must already be here. If you will check and see. Human beings are so busy moving towards some future moment where we think we'll get what we want. Very rarely do we stop and check if it's already here. Because we're not experiencing it right now, we assume it's not already here. But the self is everything in potential, and it'll only move into actuality, into manifestation, when we call that forth, when we invoke it. And currently what we're invoking is, it isn't here. The experience of it being lacking, because we're so sure that it's not here. So hope that helps. I'll do one more. If anybody would like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll come to you in a moment. Hi, Helen. Could you do a short meditation where you help us look for the separate self, that thing that we have called I, but never really examined? I've been doing it on my own, and it's been great. But doing it with you is just so nice. Yeah, we can. We'll do that maybe at the end if we've got time. If not, I'll start the next satsang with that. So I'll keep that one. Okay, I'll just go to one more then. Helen, thank you for offering this opportunity to ask a question. It's a gift. Question: I have been on the path since 24. I'm now 62. I was never able to manifest the dream of a great love, life, and kids. I was too troubled. I am still troubled. I reject relationships with anyone in the dual world, which is everything. I'm not really sure you could say anything to this. Thanks, Helen. So it's very, very common. And you can see that the challenge you're having is to trust other beings. At least that's what it appears as, right? And you're right. Everything in the world is trust, relationships. So my relationship with my parents, my siblings, my children, my co-workers, my teachers, my relationship with money, my relationship with time. But you've forgotten the big one here, which is the one that all of those other ones depend upon and cannot function correctly until the big one is sorted out. What's your relationship with you like? Do you trust yourself? If you don't feel you can trust others, or you're troubled, whatever it is that you seem to experience disappointment from with relationships with others, is something that you're not examining fully in your own self. So for me, people would let me down, disappoint me, take advantage of me over and over again. And I coped with that by deciding the world was a mean and ugly place, and isolating myself, and trying to find people that would be nice to me and all of that stuff. And it was only when I started to realize, actually, after seeing who I really am, that some part of me is disappointed in me. Some part of me doesn't trust me. Not my real self, but some part of my egoic sense of self, who I thought I was, deeply disliked my own self. My ego thinks it knows me and forms conclusions about me, and then says, you're not good enough. And these outer disappointments and betrayals and taken advantage of was a reflection of this. So it was only when I started to really do this work and look at how do I actually feel about myself. Like, I would actually cross over the road to avoid saying good morning to someone just because I didn't want to expose myself. Or I couldn't stand and look in front of the mirror because of how I felt about my body, which is really how I feel about me. And on some level, and I started to notice all of these ways that I actually really utterly disliked my own self. Who I thought I was, I disliked that. Who I actually was, I found was already lovable and worthy and safe and valued. And the divine self, the infinite consciousness, thought that I should be here. So who am I to argue with that? And yet we all do. So how do you feel about yourself? And you're going to have to get really honest with this. Not the self. We all love the self, capital S. How do I feel about my mind and my body and the way I am with my parents and the way I am with my boss and, all of that? How do I feel about my body and my diet and my lifestyle? How do I feel about the fact that I don't exercise enough? That I don't have enough friends? Am I telling myself that I'm doing a terrible job, or is it something I'm working on, but it'll happen when it happens? Am I forgiving of myself, or am I ultra critical? And these are questions that I know the answer to, and you do too. So until you fall back in love with yourself, or at least in like with yourself, then these outer relationships continue to reflect your inner attitude to your own self. I know who you are. And I know that there is not a single cell in your body that isn't of divine essence. And you know that somewhere deep down inside, but where we allow the mind to contradict what we know to be true out of habit. I believe what my mind says about me and I feel terrible, rather than actually looking and seeing if it's true. So that would be where I start. In fact, I would abandon all attempts to have any outside relationships. That will just sort itself out. You'll have more friends than you know what to do with. When you like yourself, how do you like yourself again? Firstly, by recognizing that everything you thought about yourself is not true. It's coming from mind, and mind can't see you. It's never met you. Nothing wrong with mind. It's not evil or anything. It's just not able to see you. It's like asking the software on your computer to tell you about your life. It's got no way of knowing how you're doing in life in general. So mind is a software program, and we're expecting it to run our whole existence. Okay. Would anyone like to ask any questions before I've got plenty more questions here, unless anybody would like to share or ask a question. Okay, well, I will answer one more on here, and then we'll do that meditation that was asked for. Hi, Helen. Recently, I realized I have a deep-seated shame within me, giving way to unworthiness and insecurity in my life. Can you see the theme in all of these, whether we're conscious of it or not? I don't have what I need. I'm not good enough. And underneath all of that. Anyways. I realize I have a deep-seated shame within me, giving way to unworthiness and insecurity in my life. Meanwhile, I'm also feeling I don't have the capacity to love anyone. I just feel a void in my heart. Although peace and clarity is here, I'm unable to feel the love from within. My question is there a connection between shame and love? And if so, how to transcend the shame and love myself unconditionally? Do you have any contemplation questions for it? Thanks. Is there a connection between shame and love? What if shame is love in disguise, love unallowed, love, shame when it's unexamined is shame, and when it's examined, it shows up as love. So as you examine these ideas and question if they're actually true, what does shame say about you, and unworthiness, insecurity? And really question this too. I'm feeling I don't have the capacity to love anyone. So you've never ever loved anyone. You've never fallen in love with a pet. You've never admired a beautiful sunset. You never told someone that they look nice in that outfit that they're wearing. These are all forms of love, just watered down into words like respect, admiration, approval. You've never loved a spiritual teacher or anyone or anything, right? So no, I'm saying this because mind forgets these times when we're already very loving. Isn't this a loving thing to do, to write in and ask for help for yourself? That's not coming from ego, is it? Ego's never going to write in, listen, I know I'm I'm not too good at this love thing, but can you help me? You know, this is coming from the self, the infinite self, these words. Do you really not have the capacity to love anyone? Or is that just a huge assumption based on the memory of some experiences where you couldn't let yourself fully love, let yourself love unconditionally? But you still love conditionally even now. I love you if you make me feel safe. That's conditional love. It's got conditions upon it, but it's still a form of love, and we're all adept at that. So it's not true that you can't love anyone. It's true that you might want to start to love everyone unconditionally, but you don't know how to do that. There's no shame in that, is there? Nobody taught you how to search for the real self, and nobody taught us how to love unconditionally. So as you start loving yourself unconditionally, you will fall in love with everyone else the same too. How do you love yourself unconditionally? By recognizing that the ideas that we have that are conditional. I'll love myself when. I'll like myself if. I'll be good enough if or when ... When I'm awakened enough, then. When I let abundance in, then. When I stop doing that thing. When fear goes, then. You have your own version of this. These were my laundry list of things I needed to shift before I could approve of myself. And when I fixed that relationship, and when I awakened to the self, when I've made a massive difference on this planet, then I'll feel good enough. And boy, what a road to nowhere that was. How could you possibly make a massive difference on this planet if you don't even like yourself? I mean, how is that even possible? Not so much. So examining the ideas that say you're less than lovable, really curious about them. Are they actually true, even though I've experienced them ad infinitum, over and over and over again? Maybe you've had those experiences because you believe those thoughts, not the other way around. And at the same time, so questioning the ideas that you're not lovable, looking at the conditions you put upon yourself before you like yourself, and deciding to stop doing that. If we're looking for some future moment where our mind and body reflect the perfect set of circumstances where we can finally like ourselves, as we realize that our outer circumstances pour forth from our inner abundance of love and joy, then this outer set of circumstances, this finish line that's in our head, we can never reach it, because our outer circumstances have to keep reflecting this lack of love that we have for ourselves. Not enough out there is a reflection of not enough in here. Not enough recognition that we're all divine in origin already, and still perfectly divine, no matter what we might have experienced otherwise. So divine, in fact, that any idea that we hold in front of us that we're not lovable or good enough, we experience infinitely. And therefore use that as evidence to reconfirm our belief that we're not lovable. But love gets through anyway, from beings that love you unconditionally anyway. They don't need anything from you at all. And there are so many of them, but you won't notice them if you're sure that you're not lovable. So that would be where I'd start with this. Shame is the culmination of all the beliefs you have about yourself, that you're deeply flawed or something like that, that you fell from grace. What a lot of nonsense that is. How can imperfection arise? I'm getting on a rant now, but how can imperfection arise from perfection? It's just not possible. You look at our life and go, that's imperfection. No, it's a reflection of your idea that you're imperfect. Perfection is so perfect, it can appear as imperfection, as flawed, as not good enough. Never actually so. But it will take the shape of whatever you're holding on to. If there never was a separate being that split away from God, from the self, from consciousness, then all that remains is God, the self, consciousness, appearing as a human being, thinking it's not good enough. So we have to be more willing to question that than we are willing to believe these ideas about ourselves. I didn't say you have to get rid of all the ideas, just I'm more willing to see that I might be utterly wrong in how I think about myself, and the resulting shame and unworthiness is showing you what you actually think about yourself. And I had to do this, and everyone has to do this at some point. And now's a good time, actually. Well, that's what it means when you recognize that there's only the self, showing up as taking the shape of all these ideas, appearing as the world. If you want the shortcut, just look at any thought you've ever had about yourself or anyone else or anything else and ask if it's true. Again, I'm not making mind wrong, because from mind's perspective, they're true. But are they actually true, knowing who you really are? If you want to just kind of pull the rug out from underneath the suffering, have you ever had a single true thought, ever? Could you even? Relatively, thoughts are true. I need to leave at 9:30 or else I'll be late for work, or, I left the keys in outside of my car door. I did that yesterday. At my house door, rather. So that's the shortcut if you want it, and I know you do. So, okay. So we'll just finish with that person, whoever that was, asked for a short meditation to try to find that legendary separate self. And as we do this, let's not drift off into a nice deep state if we can, because then you'll miss the benefit of what we're seeing. And remembering, if you don't find a separate self when we look, all that remains is God. Looking through your eyes, searching for God is God. Or self, capital S. Infinite being, supreme self. If you don't like the word God, it's okay. I so hated that word that I had to use the word noumenon when I started, because it was the only thing I didn't have baggage attached to. I've tried to find awareness and I can't. So let's search for a separate sense of self. Let's actually see if we can find this person. Just the intention to look. That's all we need. So right now, here in this moment, can you find a someone, a separate being? If I look for Helen right now, what do I find? And you can do this. Obviously, don't look for Helen. We can look for Helen, but I'm really trying to be sensible today, and it's not really working. So right now we find there's a body. In my experience, I can say that with absolute certainty. You can find a body too, called whatever your body's called. And there's sense perception going on, isn't there? You're hearing these words through your ears. You're seeing this image through your eyes. Is that evidence of a separate self, a body and senses? Not so much. There's also thoughts going on. There could be thoughts. memories, emotions going on within the body. And are they enough to claim that there's a separate being here? Well, not really, no, because those thoughts and emotions are not constant. There's times when there's no thoughts and no emotions. Even in deep sleep, that's all gone. What do we actually find? And there's a sense of someone here. There's a sense of a separate being, isn't there? So just zooming in on that now, it feels like, seems like, I'm sure there's someone here in this body operating it, using it. It's a very subtle sense, or sometimes very overt. I'm absolutely certain there's someone here. That what is here that I call me is an object, a subtle energy thing or something that's separate to everything else. But just looking at that sense of self now, tuning in subtly to that sense of someone. Where is it? Is it separate? Can you actually find it? Or is it a subtle feeling, actually, a sense? If you are a separate being, meaning that there's an end to your being where someone else's being begins, shouldn't you be able to find it? When I looked at this, there was a body, there's thoughts, there's emotions, there's sense perception, there's a sense of Helen using this body. When I actually looked at where and what that Helen was, I found something. Well, I didn't find a separate being. I found something very different. At first, it just was this blank and empty absence of thingness. It wasn't spectacular at all. It was no thingness, nothingness, but it didn't feel blissful or anything. It was quite terrifying, actually. I'm not at all who I thought I was. So really look, don't just assume that you are someone. Really look. If you want to be free, you really have to look. Can I find this someone? And if I can't find it in this moment, it's only a sense that I can't pin down when I actually look. Is it really here? Is it actually separate? If you and I were sat in a room together on the same sofa next to each other, where would you stop and I begin? Halfway in the space between us, would there be some imaginary division between our self? So just looking like this, really examining what this sense of someone is, because it takes on a life of its own based on our belief that it is here. So much so that for millennia, bodies come and go, and we never think to question it until it becomes so painful. And even when we have seen, I can't actually find a someone. I find something that isn't a thing. We keep going back to the allegiance of this belief in someone out of habit. Okay, I can see I'm infinite and formless, but what do I do about my, fill in the blank? It says the imaginary separate being. How do I hold on to that? Says the imaginary separate being. How do I live like that? Says the imaginary separate being. How do I get rid of my, this is one of my favorite ones. How do I get rid of this separate sense of self then? Well, it isn't here. It's an optical illusion based on the presence of a body and thoughts and sense perception and a seeming sequence of time succession. Can't get rid of something that never really existed, although it seems to. Even now for me, right now as I'm talking, I still seem to be a someone that will never go away as long as the body's here. And it's not an accident or a mistake. It's the software that runs the body-mind program. It's necessary. As long as we know it's not an actual, real, separate entity. Like if you light a candle, there's a shadow behind it. You can't get rid of that shadow while the candle's lit. It seems to have a life of its own, this shadow. It seems to move around and everything. Change shape. So it's enough to know that you're not actually separate to anything. How do you come to know that? Well, if you can't find a someone, then all that remains is the everything, the everyone. If you can't find where you stop and the next person would start, then you are the next person. You must be. We have to look at this again and again with a real deep desire to see. At the same time, not pushing away this sense of someone. Maybe it's useful. So next time someone asks you if you want a cup of tea, you're going to turn around and respond because of your name being called. But that's a name for the body and the mind. It's got really nothing to do with you. So I hope that that has been helpful. What we've done, you need to do again and again, and coming to see with utter clarity. So we will leave it there for today. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you, Helen.